And they just traded away, safety Kevin Byard. Tennessee's secondary was already pretty bad, 28th in EPA, 20th in explosive pass rate, and basically played terrible against everyone who wasn't an injured Joe Burrow, who basically couldn't move, and they schemed up a perfect game plan.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. On this episode, I'm thrilled to have on Connor Allen. He is the sports betting manager at 4for4. Among other topics, we talk about his analytics-based approach for handicapping and how that applies to sides, totals, and props. Connor was generous enough to share with us 2 bets for NFL Week 8. And we also touch on teams like Houston, Cincinnati, and San Francisco, among others. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be 3 things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every week, I send out 5 Nugget Saturday, my curated list of sports betting tips, analytics, and humor. If you're looking for action on any given weekend, this is the free service for you. To sign up for my free sports betting email newsletter, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Connor Allen. He is the sports betting manager at 4for4, and he's also the host of the Move the Line podcast. Connor, welcome to the show.
Ed, appreciate you having me on. Big fan of the show. Love what you're doing over here, and it's good to finally chat, officially over the mic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really glad we had a chance to do this. Connor, I would love to know more about your story. How did you get into sports betting and analytics?
Yeah, so, when I was younger, I was always into sports statistics, like first, second grade. I was one of those kids who would run to get the newspaper every morning, read some baseball statistics, but, didn't really start betting until I was like 14, 15 years old. I think I can say this. I made a Bovada account under my dad's name. I don't use Bovada anymore, but, deposited a bit of money, obviously, and wound up losing most of it, since I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, but eventually started a fantasy football blog on my own when I was 17, 18, started writing, leveraging, advanced statistics and context. And I thought that was really my edge. And eventually that developed into betting more specifically on player props and, handicapping some sides and totals here and there as well. So that's a brief overview, but, there are a lot of more, nuances about how I got to where I'm at today.
For sure. I feel like 14 is a pretty ripe young age to start that first betting account. So, was it just something that's always kind of been natural to you that you knew you liked this?
Yeah, I think there's just like something in my brain where I don't really like just making a bet without like consequences or saying, I would be talking to my friends and be like, oh, I think this team's going to win. They're like, oh, I think this team's going to win. And I like there being some kind of result, whether it's money or, drink or something, wagered of consequence. So that way you have some skin in the game and you actually like have to have some, consequences for your actions of handicapping.
Yeah, I feel like dopamine's a pretty powerful thing. I turned on Game 7 last night and I don't know, I just didn't have any action on it. So it seemed like a little less consequential. Kind of like what you were saying, right?
Totally.
So, I definitely get what you are saying. And, for me, I kind of started doing analytics first and in some sense, like much later, started doing more of the betting. And, it's been good to kind of, it's been a good transition for me. So, to have more action down. So totally. Connor, like you're in high school when you start this blog and start doing content, fantasy football, right? So what was the driver there?
Yeah, I just thought that I was better at fantasy football than most of my peers. And it was one of those things where maybe I marginally was, but I really just love the statistics side of it. I really enjoyed reading as much content. I was constantly scrolling Roto World during class and, reading up news blurbs and trying to look up new advanced statistics and things like that. So I started under a pseudonym, it was called Fantasy Football Matrix. It was just like some random website. And I wound up eventually just trying to grew my brand on Twitter. And after a couple of years, DM'd Evan Silva, who gave me a chance at Roto World to write some stuff there. So that kind of helped, grow my career a little bit there. And, kind of taught me how to write, because I still don't think I'm an awesome writer or anything, but they're, very strict with, their writing and everything. And I think it was a fantastic learning experience. It kind of helped me learn the media side of the business a little bit more.
Awesome. And how old were you when you started writing for Evan and Roto World?
Like right out of college. So I was doing that part-time, and actually was part-time in the industry for most of my, adult life until more recently. But I was full-time in the food business. So I, started a catering business out of college and was doing this part-time for, I don't know, 6-ish years out of college or so, until a couple of years ago.
Right. So have you transitioned out of running that food business? Because I think I actually saw that on one of your profiles somewhere. So you sold that business and now you are full-time into the sports betting world.
Yep. Yeah. Full-time BetSperts 4for4, helping on the business side across all of our, platforms of BetSperts, as well as, obviously doing podcast articles, like front-facing content at 4for4. So it's a great mix. I love it. It's, I like to work a lot. And so it's a good mix of being able to shift my brain into, the business side and money side in the off season, and then football nonstop, basically during in season.
Yep. Football is definitely nonstop. Connor, maybe give me a sense for your background in analytics and how that has played a role in this story that you've told us about.
Yeah, I would say that it was one of those things to help me gain an edge, not only on my peers, but, just like in the market. So when I still to this day, I'm constantly trying to look for new analytics that are more predictive, that are, able to give me an edge. And I think that as that's developed, obviously everyone starts somewhere and you're looking at basic stats, yards per carry, things like that. And then you see like EPA and success rate and, things that aren't necessarily super predictive, but, I think do a good job of being incredibly descriptive of what has happened. And I think leveraging that along with the context that you're seeing on the field is pretty important. And so that kind of blend there is something that I don't think is super, super common. And I think that, from an analytics perspective, that is something that is really important, leveraging not only advanced statistics, but also adding context to them when it matters most. So that's what I would say in terms of analytics, but obviously big believer. And I think there's more people putting out, great new statistics basically every single year, it seems like, that are becoming better and better, especially with such like a fluid game like football, where there is like a play-to-play basis and matchups and things like that, but it's not quite like something like baseball where there's a pitcher versus batter matchup. And so trying to capture some of that, variance in some of these metrics, I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I tend to have some guests on, year after year, and it's awesome to see just how their data sources change, right? And, what used to be box scores many years ago has now turned into pretty robust data on defensive scheme and how the defenses are trying to match up with offenses. So I think that is a really interesting part of things. Connor, maybe you've told us a sense for how you handicap, it seems like. I mean, it's a combination of the analytics that you just talked about and then putting it into context. Is that about right? Or is there more to it in terms of how you look at NFL sides, totals, props?
No, I think that's about it. I think there's a lot of different angles that I like to take, when handicapping props, specifically. Some of it starts with the data, looking at usage, I think, is really important. I think probably one of the biggest drivers. We have our projections at 4for4, I think, a really solid base of like understanding the usage. And then beyond that, obviously the matchup is really important. And, I think that that's just like the baseline, though. Like you have to understand more than that, because, matchups and usage can change, because certain defenses will specifically scheme against a certain player a certain way. And, that sometimes is shown historically and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't know what coaches are going to do. So trying to understand as much of that context as possible when betting on props versus sides and totals is I think it's really important and kind of the differentiator. And sometimes I think that's where a lot of the variance comes into play too, because you have certain teams that will decide, all right, well, we've played zone 80% of the time this year, but we're going to play a ton of man here and we're going to blitz a ton. Like, I mean, I think the Tennessee Titans against the Bengals a couple weeks ago is a great example. They have been getting wrecked all year and just knew that Joe Burrow was immobile and decided to get as much pressure as possible, play a bunch of man, and Burrow looked like a cupcake. So it's like one of those things that you couldn't have really predicted specifically, but coaching plays a major factor as well.
For sure. In that example with Tennessee's defense against the hobbled Joe Burrow, how did that affect, did that affect your predictions for usage for the receivers for the Bengals?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I got caught on the wrong side of that. So, I thought that Joe Burrow and that the Bengals offense would go pass heavy, kind of like they did in their previous outing. I believe it was against the Rams the game prior. And instead, we saw them checking into runs. We saw them doing a lot of draw plays, feeding exactly into Tennessee's, approach there, a lot of third and long. So, I had incorrectly assumed that there would be that they would do the right thing and continue to go pass heavy, a lot of quick scheming, on early downs there. And they didn't do that. So, it's one of those things where learning in hindsight, there are things to take away from that. But yeah, there's a lot of different angles in this one. But yeah, I think I actually got caught on the wrong side of that one specifically.
Yeah, well, we all make mistakes. That's not a problem at all. Do you feel like there are particular coaches that you trust for kind of trying to understand scheme and how they may play? I mean, is Zach Taylor someone of Cincinnati, is he someone that you feel like and this was a one-off that you were wrong about how he approached the game?
No, I think Zach Taylor is a tough example because he seems to not always do the optimal thing. Whereas I think historically there are certain players and certain teams that we can feel pretty comfortable about, going pass heavy, going run heavy in certain situations. I think a great example would be, the Atlanta Falcons, Arthur Smith. They're going to skew run heavy no matter what, but if they're able to run the ball, they're just going to keep doing it. It took him until this year to come out and say in a press conference, I believe it was last week, that finally, they were loading the box, they're stopping the run. Okay, we're going to go pass heavy. It's one of those things that some coaches have reliable trends, some coaches really don't. And I think that focusing on those specifically in the prop market can lead to better results. And I think other than that, though, it's like, yeah, I mean, defensively, I think there's a little bit more tendencies as well, too, because you have some teams that are primarily like a zone team and they just sit back. Like Jonathan Gannon's defense over the last year, like they're just going to sit back. They're going to play zone. And for some quarterbacks, again, I think Joe Burrow in this example too, had a great game against them because they didn't get pressure, they didn't blitz, they just let him kind of do whatever, and he had a fantastic game. And so that kind of difference, even though he literally just saw the blueprint of shutting down this offense,
right?
He didn't do that, and so that's kind of I think more sticky year to year or week to week. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we were talking about this with Gannon as the DC last year in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I think Adam Chernoff was talking about how Gannon plays his two deep safeties, doesn't really matter who he plays. And Kansas City completely took advantage of that in the Super Bowl, right? Like they took everything underneath, had some absurd passing success rate, and were essentially unstoppable in the second half, which was, kind of the difference in that game, right? So it sounds like he hasn't really changed much as the head coach in Arizona this year.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's, I think that's a pretty key factor there. And we see that, across the league from different defensive coordinators. Now, some don't do that and some do. So I think understanding the differences of who's pretty stable week to week and who isn't can help out a lot.
Connor, when you're betting props, do you have your own model or do you work with other people at BetSperts to produce a model?
Yeah, so we have our own projections that we do, and basically it starts with our weekly model that we have a lot of different inputs for, and then spits out a number. Then we hand adjust a lot of our players. We have a projections team that helps. John Paulson does primarily the main projections, but obviously we go through everything, talk about usage, matchups, things like that. Zone, man, splits, everything that we think is relevant. And then try and adjust our projections from there. And then we obviously, simulated them against lines and use a bunch of different features, either via our own site or some of our other partners' sites.
Excellent. All the stuff about usage and scheme and looking at coaches, do you find that much more valuable with player props, or do you find it similarly valuable looking at sides and totals?
Yeah, I think it can be used in both scenarios. But personally, I think that it's more effective in player props because you're only betting on one, granular section of the game versus an entire outcome. Because even if, I think in the Thursday night game here, we're talking about, Josh Allen versus a Tampa Bay team that's going to blitz a lot. They're going to play a ton of zone. And so that's only one section of the game here because this Buffalo defense hasn't been playing very good. So I think it's narrowing down your handicap into certain players, in my mind, is significantly more effective than, even though I think that there's a pretty solid angle in this game with what I was just mentioned. There's still so much other stuff that can happen on top of, turnovers and extra things that add more variance to the game.
For sure. All the analytics that you've talked about, how do you mix in watching games?
Yeah, I mean, I watch every single game, and I think that just helps me understand, I guess, how players got to their, stat lines, how they're getting to their numbers specifically, and then also kind of helps me put some context into certain statistics that weigh different, I guess, factors. So, like, I think a good example is like EPA that weighs, touchdowns are part of EPA, and like longer runs, whereas like balancing that with success rate, because again, this Bucks defense, they're technically great in, EPA, but like, or their run defense is technically great in EPA, but like overall in success rate, I think they're like 17th, 18th, something like that. So it's one of those things where understanding that, okay, well, they're not allowing touchdowns to the position. Whereas on a play-to-play basis, are they really that good of a team? So I think like watching the games is really helpful in my mind to understand and like kind of like fully flesh out that context.
Excellent. Connor, is there a week 8 NFL bet that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go with 2 since I know this podcast will like to have a longer shelf life than just Thursday here, but the only props available as we're recording here is a Thursday night prop. So I'm going to go with Dalton Kincaid over 37.5 receiving yards. I like this up to 40 receiving yards here. Last week, Kincaid went 8 for 75 against Pat's defense, normally stout against tight ends. Dawson Knox looks like he's going to be out in this spot. So I think it's going to be significantly more usage here for Kincaid. Bucks defense has been pretty solid against the tight end position so far, but I think the key is Kincaid doesn't really play tight end. So he lined up out wide nearly 40% of the time, in the slot 35% of the time, and was in line as a tight end just 17% of the time. So I expect them to play a little bit more 11 personnel now with Knox, acting essentially as a receiver, and leverage Kincaid in similar ways as they did last week. So I don't think we're going to see him necessarily as a tight end. And then looking specifically more at this matchup, last week against zone coverage, Kincaid absolutely crushed. 7 of his 8 catches were against zone. 71 of his 75 yards were against zone. Just went 1 for 4 against man coverage. And he had a 35% target share against zone coverage last week, higher than Stephon Diggs. Bucks, as I mentioned earlier, play zone nearly 70% of the time, one of the tops in the leagues. They also blitz at a high rate. Kincaid also led the team in target share against zone blitzes so far. So I think 37.5 yards. I know we're kind of buying high a little bit on a guy like Dalton Kincaid, but I like this up to 40. I think it's a solid look there.
Excellent. Dalton Kincaid came into the league with kind of a lot of hype of supreme athleticism. How do you think that has turned out? Because obviously things don't always translate from college to the pros.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting because to date he was kind of a disappointment. Like through 6 weeks, his average at the target was super low. Like he just wasn't really being used, I think, how most people anticipated. It seems almost in hindsight like, why didn't they just draft Zay Flowers or receiver? Because again, like as I mentioned with where he's lining up, they're basically just using him as a big receiver. And so in this instance, it's fine. But overall, I think they probably would have been much better off with picking a guy like Zay Flowers. So I don't know. I think we'll see how it goes. Maybe he could totally prove me wrong, and hopefully he does here and gets going, continues to crush here against Tampa Bay. But yeah, I think in hindsight, from like a pure football perspective, I don't think that the pick was all that good.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see with these rookie receivers. I'm pretty sure Jordan Addison wasn't too good for Minnesota until Monday night, where all of a sudden he rips the ball away from the defender, goes for a long touchdown, and everything's all different, right? So I think there's got to be, I think you got to be a little bit patient. I mean, obviously you want every
for sure
rookie to be like Zay Flowers and just completely explode onto the scene, but I'm not sure that always happens.
Also tight ends too. I mean, they generally take way more time to develop because you have to learn how to like block and you have to learn how to run routes and the nuances surrounding that. So generally, rookie tight ends almost never do well. And I was a little bit more cautious heading into the season with Kincaid because of that factor specifically. But, all of the offseason we're hearing, their new 11.5 personnel. That's what they kept calling it, featuring Kincaid as kind of like that third receiver there. And to be honest, we just didn't really see a whole lot of usage out of it initially, but maybe I think this is going to be the spark here that gets them going, especially since we saw the usage last week too.
Excellent. Connor, you also mentioned you might have a side or total for later in the weekend.
Yeah, I like Atlanta here against Tennessee. Let's see what this number is up to specifically here. Looking at still 2.5, I believe, in some spots, 3 in others. I think I would still lay the 2.5 and consider laying the 3. We're seeing a Tennessee team. We got news this morning that they're going to be starting Will Levis and probably see a sprinkle of Malik Willis. I mean, Will Levis was not even able to beat out Malik Willis in training camp for the backup job here. They're playing behind a terrible offensive line, and they just traded away, safety Kevin Byard. Tennessee's secondary was already pretty bad, 28th in EPA, 20th in explosive pass rate, and basically played terrible against everyone who wasn't an injured Joe Burrow, who basically couldn't move, and they schemed up a perfect game plan. Now they get, a much more quarterback in Desmond Ridder, who has played a little bit better as of late, and I think in this spot here, Atlanta's going to be able to take advantage of that. Like, there's a multitude of factors beyond that. Kevin Byard led the defense in snaps. Like, he is a pretty key contributor for them, and has been an all-pro safety multiple times. So it's one of those things where you have an already bad secondary that now is losing basically one of their best players back there, and I think is going to be in really tough shape. And then matching up against an Atlanta team that I think is kind of figuring it out a little bit in the passing game. Now, the running game hasn't been as good as we've seen in years past, but at this point, I don't think that matters too much. We're looking at Tennessee's run defense has already been stellar. They're getting Tart back as well, who's kind of been one of the anchors on their run defense. So I like Atlanta here up to 3 because I truly just think that their offense could be, horrendously bad on top of, everything else we already mentioned.
Right, for sure. I guess, it was kind of interesting. The last time Tennessee took the field, Malik Willis comes in because Tannehill gets hurt, and Malik Willis, well, he had one play, right? I think it was a screen pass or some kind of bubble screen that went a long way. Mm-hmm. And then he was back to being Malik Willis. And then they kick a field goal on 3rd down, which I still don't. Do you understand that, or am I just?
No, I have no idea what was going on.
Okay.
Very strange.
I guess with if you're going to kick a field goal on 3rd down, I guess I just don't understand the thinking, right? Because you still need to throw. You're very close to scoring a touchdown down 8. I was thrilled that he kicked the field. Not that I was really worried about Baltimore -4 or whatever number I got that week. But obviously, you pretty much clinch it when you kick the field goal there. And then I don't know. I just were you going to kick the field goal and then throw Will Levis out there to try to get your second score because you're not winning the game, right? So, and I guess this all matters because if they really are going to start Levis, coach really, really didn't like what he saw from Willis, right?
Yeah. I think at this point we kind of know that Malik Willis is not the guy, and he's kind of not going to pan out, especially within this system. And so they're just giving Will Levis a chance because I guess why not? That's kind of what it seems like at this point because there's a lot in my mind. There's some signal to what's going on, right? They're trading away one of their best players defensively. They're giving the guy who they have literally no idea if he's going to be okay or absolutely horrible, the chance here. So I think that they're probably more comfortable with Willis being the guy, as we saw, again, Tannehill gets hurt, Willis goes in, and he's not good, but I think they kind of know what they have. Whereas Will Levis, they have no idea. It would not surprise me, especially if they lose this game, if they trade away more players kind of going forward, especially heading into the trade deadline, which I believe is right after this Sunday.
So big time tankathon there.
I think there's definitely a chance here. You're heading in after this game, they'd be 2-5. Again, their offensive line is beat up and not very good. Their defense isn't very good at this point, or their secondary is very good. They don't really have a realistic shot to win. So I think that there's definitely a chance that they start shipping away more guys. Derrick Henry, I think, could be a possibility as well.
Right. Well, if you can get anything for a running back these days, right?
Right. It would not be a very much return, to be honest.
Connor, I like that you are you're taking Atlanta here. I think you did that entire handicap without mentioning Desmond Ridder. So I do have to ask you what you think about the quarterback there.
Yeah, I was pretty down on him entering the year. He did not look good, but I think he's been playing a little bit better. As of late, it's at certain times. I mean, he's inconsistent. He makes some throws where it's so boneheaded. You're like, why, what happened there? What was going on? What was going through his head? But at the same time, I think he's kind of smoothing out some of the bumps here. As he progresses, which makes sense. He's getting more games under his belt. And I think that the weapons that he has also help him out a lot with, Jonnu Smith is playing a bigger role. Kyle Pitts has played all right. He's still recovering from like an offseason knee injury. And then Drake London, I think, should be playing a much bigger role here. So if they're able to go, if Arthur Smith says, all right, we're going to go pass heavy here, I think that they're going to go have a massive game. And pass heavy for the Falcons is probably like a neutral pass rate.
Exactly.
I think everything's relative, but that would be a massive step for them in this spot.
For sure. I think, Atlanta won the game last week, but obviously could have been a lot more with the fumble that Ridder had right on the goal line. And, I think Kyle Pitts actually got some targets. I mean, I actually don't. I've never done fantasy. So, some of it just kind of creeps into my timeline, but like the whole X player is not getting usage from fantasy people always amuses me. So maybe some of the people that, that had Kyle Pitts are maybe a little bit happier now, right?
I mean, I don't even know if anyone's starting him at this point. Like, it's like he was like a mid to late round pick, and he's been such a disappointment to start the year. We just haven't seen the spike plays, mostly because the volume has been down. But again, Jonnu Smith's emergence, is really kind of just shut down like either both Drake London or Kyle Pitts being consistent, because you added a third, player in an offense that's already not passing very much, and it really just diminishes the volume across the board for all of them.
Absolutely. Connor, I wanted to ask you about a couple of games this week. Cincinnati is going to San Francisco after a bye week. We already talked a little bit about Joe Burrow and his lack of mobility. They've struggled. San Francisco looked absolutely amazing until about 2 weeks ago, and have dropped a couple games. I personally thought that they were just flying way too high. I mean, they looked fantastic through those first 5 games, and a little bit of regression was inevitable. Anyways, maybe give me a breakdown for these two teams and what you see in this game.
Yeah, so it's interesting because all the media coverage, at least so far this season, for the Bengals has been around Burrow and the offense not living up to expectations because of Burrow's injury. But to me, the most surprising thing about this has been kind of the Bengals' defense. I mean, they played well before their bye against Seattle, but that was with Seattle's offensive line banged up. I mean, this Bengals defense, 25th in run defense EPA, 31st in explosive run rate, 25th in success rate allowed. I mean, their pass defense has been average, but I just don't think that's going to cut it when your run defense is that bad. Now you're getting a team against the Niners who, without Trent Williams, didn't play that well, specifically offensively, and Deebo Samuel. But I think here the basics and the fundamentals of this 49ers offense is that they're able to run the ball here, and they're going to have a ton of success doing that here against Cincinnati. And so you add that in, and so. Like, I think that San Francisco is probably going to have a good chance to score plenty of points in this one, because if you look back at what it took for this 49ers team to have like a 2-week gap of them struggling, they, had some fluky things happening against the Browns' top tier defense. Then the Vikings, it took a Christian McCaffrey fumble, a missed field goal, of the fluky 60-yard touchdown that we already talked about where, Jordan Addison ripped it out of the corner's hands with 8 seconds left in the first half, and then multiple uncharacteristic Brock Purdy interceptions. So I think it took a lot for them to lose. So I still lean towards San Francisco here, but I do think, though, I mean, this 49ers defense didn't look all that good last week. Only pressured Kirk Cousins on 24% of his dropbacks, whereas the whole season he's been under pressure over 31% of the time. So if they can get pressure on Burrow, I think that the Niners win and cover. If they can't, then I lean towards the over here. It's only like 45.
Connor, another game I was interested in is Houston going to Carolina. It's a matchup of rookie quarterbacks. Bryce Young was the first pick overall in the draft and hasn't looked good. CJ Stroud was the second pick in the draft and has looked remarkable so far this season. What are you seeing of these two teams and this game?
This game is interesting because CJ Stroud has largely been excellent, while Bryce Young has been pretty awful to start. Played a little bit better as of late, but to be honest, I think his success has kind of come against bad defenses like Miami, or in garbage time. And even heading into this Miami game, Miami had allowed a 90.1% completion rate on throws between 1 to 10 yards. That's basically all Bryce Young was doing, was just like dinking and dunking. And so him having some success, again, dinking and dunking to Adam Thielen was really not that surprising. But what it was interesting to me here is that this Panthers defense has been among the worst in the league by a pretty wide margin in terms of EPA and success rate. On run defense, their pass defense has also been pretty bad. So it's one of those things where I think the Texans offense here is going to have a reasonable amount of success in this game. And the Texans defense, I think, has played well above their billing here. I don't think they necessarily have a ton of good talent, but the DeMeco Ryans effect here, and kind of this whole defense has been playing significantly better as a unit. And the offense with Bobby Slowick, Kyle Shanahan disciple, CJ Stroud, this whole pairing here with his timing, with his accuracy, has been really impressive. Like, it's not always going to be a smooth ride, and there's definitely been some bumps along the road, but it's a good matchup for them. So I think that Houston's going to continue playing well here, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them continue making a push throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. The markets agree with you. Have Houston as a 3-point favorite on the road. I think, 2 months ago, that would maybe have been a preposterous line with, Houston, the expectation being one of the bottom 5 teams, but they really look like they're climbing out of that, as you mentioned, on both sides of the ball. Like, how much of a surprise is that for you?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I thought that there was an outside chance that they could be better than we expected. I mean, coming into the year, we had I think it was 5.5 juice, maybe 6.5 win total for this Texans team. And I thought that was about right, but that they had some upside in a division that I thought could be fairly weak. And in this spot, though, I think they've even outplayed my expectations of the potential here, because especially week 1, they played pretty poorly against Baltimore. I was like, maybe it's just not going to happen this year. Maybe we were right. And the rest of the season, they've been, largely very competitive in basically every game.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, comes from the Shanahan tree. I feel like Kyle Shanahan should get a finder's fee, right? He should get some of the salaries of these guys, all these guys, McDaniel in Miami, he's producing these guys. He's like the hot new thing, right?
For real. And I would love to understand what it is, whether it's just some type of innovative thinking that, causes them to create, new ideas and new plays along with a already strong base system. Plus, Bobby Slowick, it's Bobby Slowick Jr. His dad was also, in the league and well around football for, I think his entire life. So I think Bobby probably has, good football roots, and now has gotten that Kyle Shanahan, touch of magic, I guess I would say, on top of that. So it's such an interesting thing here. And if Bobby Slowick in this offense keeps playing better, I would not be surprised if Bobby Slowick becomes, a head coach in the next 2 years. I don't think that's outrageous, even though we're only 7 games into the season. It's
kind of remarkable the kind of meteoric rise that you can have, right? Ben Johnson's only been the offensive coordinator in Detroit for, 20 games, right? And it was kind of a surprise that he didn't jump ship somewhere and take a coaching position. So and obviously for me that's a pretty small sample size, but I came into the season underestimating what Detroit's offense could do, and basically been wrong so far. So I think, do you have any sense, from your watching games, what exactly that they're doing, or is it?
Well, I think it's
what makes for good coordinators.
Yeah, I think it's just a blend of leveraging what your team can do well and what your quarterback can do well. Because so a lot of what CJ Stroud is doing, a lot of it's timing based, a lot of it's accuracy based. He's throwing the ball like darts in between zones, and I think that other quarterbacks, and especially other rookie quarterbacks, that just might not be a great fit for, to be honest. And so I think that Bobby Slowick understands what he has, and then has been continuing to leverage that. On top of that, I think you've seen the Texans wide receiver core, outplay their billing a little bit here. Nico Collins has looked awesome. Right. And then you have Tank Dell stepping forward in a big role. Robert Woods was supposed to be kind of like their rock, and they're almost like Adam Thielen-esque, and really hasn't had to do a whole lot besides just be out there. And, he's basically getting cardio every Sunday, to be honest. So now you have John Mechie returning too. There's just a lot of different factors here playing into this, but yeah, I think that understanding your personnel and leveraging them has been what the difference making has been for a guy like Bobby Slowick.
And then maybe the opposite for what's going on with Bryce Young in Carolina under Frank Reich, right?
Yeah,
because I feel like
it's been tough.
Yeah, and I feel like the situations were similar in some sense, right? You had pretty respected, well, I mean, in Frank Reich, I think a reasonably respected offensive mind. And then you also had a Carolina offense that was in rebuilding mode, getting rid of DJ Moore to actually get the pick to take Young. But I'm not sure before the start of the season, I would have said that Houston's receiving core is better than Carolina's receiving core. I would have put both of them in the bottom 5 of the league.
Yeah, it's tough because I don't think that they really set up Bryce Young to succeed, because if you look at, like, even heading into the season, you had an offensive line that was, middle of the pack at best, maybe bottom tier, and they've turned out to not be very good. And then you have a receiving core where Adam Thielen, I was way down on Adam Thielen, and that was turning out to be way wrong. His yards per route run declined in 6 straight seasons heading into this year, wasn't playing all that well. DJ Chark had the lowest open rate scores in the last decade, basically, in Matt Harmon's reception perception. So he's literally one of the worst separators in the league, basically just a clear out guy. And so who is he going to throw the ball to when he doesn't have time and doesn't have good receivers? So even heading into the year, no matter what scheme you have, unless your scheme is truly transcendent, I just don't think a rookie quarterback is going to be able to succeed in that situation. And we're kind of seeing that come to fruition here. And on top of that, I think it's pretty interesting because there's been some comments from Frank Reich. If you go back to the draft, everyone kind of assumed, okay, well, they're going to pick CJ Stroud at the beginning because, CJ Stroud kind of fits the mold of a Frank Reich guy better, was super accurate, things, yada, yada. Now you have him coming out and saying that they can't run certain plays because of Bryce Young's size. And basically he came out and said that the owner came in and wanted Bryce Young. And so that's why they have him. So I don't know. I think that there's definitely a few more questions here. Yeah. Internally that what's going on behind the scenes, because he hasn't looked good. He hasn't played well. And it seems like there's so much disconnect between scheme and where these guys should be and his accuracy and under pressure. It's been honestly kind of a disaster.
Yeah, no, for sure. And just with his size out there, he looks small at Alabama, but he looks really tiny in the NFL. And I just feel like, when I watch him, I'm kind of like, yeah, try not to get hurt, bud. Right. So anyways, we will see where that takes us. Connor, you also mentioned Miami's defense. This is a unit that I've been kind of tracking because of how awful they have looked. I think it's a set of players that I kind of expect to be around NFL average, as they have been over the last couple of seasons. Now they're in the bottom 5. Xavier Howard has been hurt. And I think what was lost when they destroyed Denver was that, the defense didn't play good, and maybe you chalk that up to garbage time or whatnot, but they also had a pretty poor performance against Mac Jones in New England, who has subsequently looked terrible and, maybe on the rebound after the performance against Buffalo. What is going on with that unit?
Yeah, I admittedly, it seems like one of those things where I was excited coming into the year because Vic Fangio, I thought, was a defensive coordinator that was a true difference maker. He made the 2015 Chicago Bears defense that was essentially devoid of talent be about league average. And I think that part of it's just the scheme that he runs is just not really working anymore. And the players that he has aren't good enough to kind of overcome that. So it's those combination of factors here where they're allowing, like I mentioned, an insane amount of completions underneath. And given the, changes in offense, what we've seen is more defenses are playing too high. And because they're trying not to get beat over the top, because you have quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, you have quarterbacks like Josh Allen, who are able to really expose you if you're going to play single high safeties against them at certain times. And so now I think they're more accustomed to it. And then when you're getting that on top of a defense that already isn't playing well or already isn't able to stop things underneath, then teams are just taking what Miami's giving them and then mixing in things over the top as well when Miami does decide to get aggressive. So it's those combination of factors that nothing's working right now. Maybe Jalen Ramsey comes back and makes an impact for them, but I don't think that it's going to be night and day. I mean, maybe they go from one of the bottom tier defenses to maybe middle of the pack if he really makes that much of a difference. But again, he's coming off of an injury in a scheme that just hasn't really seemed to work so far.
Yeah, for sure. I love Jalen Ramsey, but I'm not sure he's going to make much of a difference. I actually honestly think they would probably benefit most from just a little bit of regression, maybe a little bit of health.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much bad play. And it's kind of a bummer because the offense is explosive and really fun to watch, right?
Yep, amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
Really amazing with what they've done. So, what is kind of the ceiling for that team? I mean, I think it's high if the defense can regress to NFL average, which I think is or even just not bottom 10, right? For the rest of the season, and then the offense can continue to do what it does, and Tua stays healthy. it could be a pretty good team.
Yeah, I'm a big Dolphins guy. This coming in the season, I have some Mike McDaniel Coach of the Year tickets. But I mean, the reality is, like, even if you go back and look at that game against Buffalo, like, the scoreboard says it wasn't a close game, and frankly, it wasn't. But a lot of that just had to do with the defense was not being able to get stops, and so like even a couple of stops here and there would have kept Miami in the game, because it was like, oh, Miami had a couple penalties, drive stalled offensively, and then what are you going to do? Or they had a fumble, and like, it just took like a couple of plays to throw Miami's offense off, and the defense literally couldn't get a stop. And so if you can't get a stop, then, and Miami has even a couple of, I think, kind of fluky or, a little bit of variance offensively, like, you can't keep up with that. And so that's what they need, whether it's causing more havoc, whether it's, like, things just need to change here. They just need to do something well. And right now they're not doing anything well.
Absolutely. Connor, how about a surprise prediction for the rest of the 2023 NFL season?
Yeah, I'm going to go with, and I guess we already talked about it a little bit here in the handicap we added in, but I like the Tennessee Titans to finish with the worst record in the NFL. This is, so right now, before the show, I grabbed some earlier in the week. This is like 30-1 at FanDuel. I think this should be closer to 15-1 here, because if you look at what happens here, if they lose to Atlanta, and again, I already talked about, I think that they probably lose here. I mean, they could have a complete fire sale. Like, if they trade away multiple other guys here, this is going to get ugly fast. Like, if Will Levis is clearly not a pro-ready prospect in most, NFL coaches' minds, and doesn't have a whole lot to work with around him. Treylon Burks has been banged up basically all season. DeAndre Hopkins doesn't look like he's been the player of old, and their offensive line is terrible, and their running game has not been as good as it should have been in previous seasons either. Derrick Henry's kind of winding down. His career has really not played as well as previous seasons, which is unsurprising given the workload and how much of a beating he's taken over the years. So, like, I think that this is very much in their range of outcome. Now, again, you're taking something that's a little bit of a longer shot here and a surprise prediction, but like, I think that this is something that could be very reasonable a week from now when we're looking at that, if they lose to Atlanta and trade away a couple players.
Where did you bet them for the worst?
It was at FanDuel 31-1. I think that they pulled it earlier, but I would bet it'll be back up before this week. They've done a pretty good job of keeping that kind of market up, throughout the season.
Yeah, no, I Tennessee's a team that I've been trying to bet against as much as possible. Obviously, the game a couple weeks ago against Baltimore was one of the ones I've been a little bit more public about. I don't think this team is very good. But yeah, obviously, if you don't have Tannehill, who actually I don't think is very good, but he's better than the alternative, and then you do lose this game. I'm just looking at the bottom of the NFL, right? I mean, you do have some tough competition in Arizona and Carolina.
Definitely.
Carolina we already talked about. I think Arizona's actually been really good compared to what most people expected coming into the season. You also have Chicago down there at 2-5. That is going with a rookie undrafted quarterback at this point in the season. So there's definitely competition there as well for to be the worst. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you need a good price. Like, I wouldn't take like a 5-1 or anything like that. Like, I would think you need at least 10-1 or better here, because like you said, there is competition. Their schedule does lighten up in the back half of the season. But if you think about, what this team could become, I think that they're very much in the, the bottom dwelling, tier here, if a few things break your way. So if you're getting, longer odds, even 15-1, 20-1, whatever it reopens at, I think are all very much in play here, because I mean, like you said, Arizona's outperformed expectations, at least in my mind. They've kept a couple of games close. They should have won at least, more than what they're at now. And the Panthers, I think, inevitably should be a little bit better and will probably win some games, as the season progresses. But right now, things look pretty bleak, to be entirely honest. And the Bears, they're interestingly enough, their defense has played two pretty strong games here now that they're fully healthy. They played really well against the Vikings offense that actually looked great against the Niners. They looked really good against the Raiders team, which I don't know how much stock we put into this, but I think that it's something to monitor going forward for this Bears team. And Tyson Bagent didn't have to do literally anything. I mean, his average up the target was like a couple of yards, but I think that they're squarely in play, and that's the whole point of taking something like this.
Yeah, for sure. I also feel like there was kind of a narrative that Mike Vrabel was this great coach that got the most out of his players. I think a lot of that comes from 2 years ago when my numbers had them as an NFL average team, but they were 11-5, 11-6, whatever there was, or 12. they were like the top seed, right?
12-4. They were the worst number one seed I've in my lifetime, I think.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, where does Vrabel sit in all this, right? Like, is he just a coach that has some kind of tenure and the ownership is going to be happy to tank around that and keep him on, or where do you see that?
Yeah,
going?
That's the big question here. I mean, and that's kind of one of the puzzles that we're trying to figure out here, because it was interesting. I thought that there was a chance that they maybe do this like heading into the season, but then they signed DeAndre Hopkins. So I thought, okay, well, that's kind of probably some signal that they're not going to do this. And then now, I mean, the opposite's happened. They had a tough early strength of schedule. They lost, they're 2-4 in this spot, and they traded away their best, one of their best defenders. So it's like, I think that's signal now saying, okay, well, all of our guys are injured. We have no one left. Let's just try and see what we can do and build for next year. I do think Vrabel's a good coach, but I just don't know how much that plays a factor in here when you have like nothing to work with.
Yeah, for sure. Connor, I wanted to ask you about kind of who you see as the favorites to make the Super Bowl at this point. I think from my perspective, everything is very jumbled in both conferences. We talked about San Francisco. I was never high on Philly coming into the season. Mm-hmm. And then, in the AFC, Cincinnati's been bad. I don't think Kansas City is playing nearly to the level that we expect. We've seen some issues with Buffalo, obviously losing against New England. Maybe give us a sense for who you see kind of making the Super Bowl in both conferences.
Yeah, the chalk right now, according to the odds, the Chiefs and the Niners. But I'm going to stick with the Chiefs, in the AFC. I think that what's interesting is that this defense is playing really, really well, especially their pass defense specifically has played extremely well this season. I think it's one of the best that Mahomes has had in his career. And so if they figure things out offensively, like you mentioned it, like their offense hasn't fully been clicking all the time. And I think that's understandable here, because you're in a spot where you don't have really many other go-to options outside of Travis Kelce. But a guy like Rashee Rice stepping up, and we've seen that in the past few weeks here, like has made a big difference, I think, and will continue to make a big difference for this offense. So as long as they like one of these guys, whether it's Sky Moore, MVS, Rashee Rice, someone develops into like another option for Mahomes to go to, I think that could provide a boost for this offense here. So with the defense that they have, I mean, they're going to make the playoffs, obviously, as long as that continues to develop and their offense figures it out a little bit. I think the Chiefs are a pretty solid look here in the AFC. Niners are tough to go against. They haven't really looked great, but if we want to go further down the board, I think like a dark horse team to make a run in the Super Bowl could be like the Seattle Seahawks. Their defense now fully healthy, been dominant all year in the running game, but last few weeks they got back Jamal Adams, Devin Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen, all fully healthy, and they played really, really well. So I think that's kind of interesting. There is something to watch for, is that if that secondary unit continues to mesh, I think this defense is extremely dangerous, and that the offense, has also been banged up here. Their offensive line is banged up a little bit. Zach Charbonnet's hurt. DK Metcalf missed last week. So you have all those factors here. But again, we're in week 8. They're 4-2. So they win. They have like 6 games against teams that they're clearly better against, and they have a couple of games later on that against teams that are really good, but I think that they can win 1 or 2 of those games. So you make the playoffs, everyone's healthy. I think that we're talking about like 35-1, 40-1 to win the Super Bowl. I'm not sure if that's something that I love betting, but at the same time, I think they're like a dark horse team who could make a run in an NFC, like you said, pretty jumbled.
Yeah, I love it. I asked for 1 surprise prediction, and I get 2 with Seattle making a late run. I did want to get back to a little bit about Kansas City's defense, because my numbers also really like the way they have defended the pass. I just kind of think that's unsustainable, right? I mean, I think they've been good, but like what coming into the season, I mean, they've made a franchise out of having Patrick Mahomes, getting these fast receivers and building that offense. And I do believe that they'll figure something out, because they've always kind of figured something out, right? With the defense, they've always just, they have enough good players to make it about NFL average. And I guess I just don't see the personnel to sustain like a third. I'm looking at their third in my passing success rate adjusted for opponent. Yep. So, I think they're going to regress, just like Miami's going to regress the other way. Do you have an argument why maybe they can sustain that?
I don't think I have an argument necessarily against that. And they're probably, I think to your point, they're probably not like a top 3 pass defense. But I think even if they're fringe top 10, maybe they regress a little bit around that area. I think that's still more than enough. So, I mean, Trent McDuffie's been playing really well, right now, which is a good sign. The rest of their team, like you said, has been playing fine. But they're getting pressure at a really high rate, which is really important too. Second in pressure rate right now, according to my numbers. So, like, when you're getting pressure, when you have at least a couple of guys stepping up in the secondary, like, I think that can matter a lot here. So it's definitely something to watch for continuing to the playoffs and the rest of the season here. But so far they're looking great. So if they regress, I think that's something certainly to keep in mind for sure.
Connor, I'd love to end the show with some potentially non-sports questions. What's your favorite book?
Yeah, so admittedly, I don't read a ton anymore. I actually made a bet with my, wife last year after the football season that I would read a book, and I read Project Hail Mary, which was nice. It was an entertaining kind of sci-fi book. It was like a nice, easy read. Thought that was pretty solid. Admittedly, it's just kind of like I work all day and then I use a lot of my brain power that. And then when I'm not working, I really like to enjoy doing things that require like no thinking, which is like basically just watching TV and mellowing out a little bit. So I know that's not necessarily an excuse to not read, and it's something I do more in the off season, or plan to do more in the off season this year instead of in season, because sometimes my brain just like,
of course.
I'm struggling at the end of most days. Yeah, right.
We all feel that during football season. Project Hail Mary is by Andy Weir, if I'm not mistaken, the author of The Martian.
Yep.
It was I don't know if you read The Martian too, but or seen the movie, but the movie is actually very similar to the book. Would you say that Project Hail Mary is better than that?
I really liked it. I think it's just like, I don't know. I think the Project Hail Mary was very wholesome. I'll say that. I think that's like, wholesome. The end of the book, I felt good about it. And I can't say the same thing about like every single book, that I read. It's like, or every single movie. It's like, some of them purposely leave a bad taste. Like this was like, I just felt good about the ending, and it was one of those things where, you feel good about it. I don't want to like spoil it for anyone who wants to read it.
Yeah, no, I love the word wholesome for that. It actually reminds me, I read Leaving Las Vegas kind of as my before, during, and after trip when I went out to Bet Bash in August. And like wholesome is kind of the last word you would use to describe that book, which kind of makes it interesting in and of itself. And it's also like it just reminded me, it was also like one of the saddest things. I actually haven't watched the movie yet. I think they're pretty hand in hand, but awesome. Yeah. Anyways, love that perspective. Connor, what's your best culinary experience?
This is a tough one because I really like food, and there's a ton of great restaurants in Chicago, which is where I'm from. But one of my most recent favorites was like a 16-course omakase experience at a place called Q Sushi in Chicago. They fly in a bunch of the fresh fish from all over the world, and you have like a personal chef basically like explaining how they garnish each piece with like sauce or blowtorching it, or basically what everything is. And yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, it wasn't super cheap, but it was one of those. It was an experience, and it was great, top to bottom. So I really, really enjoyed it.
15-course sushi meal does not sound cheap in any way.
No, it was not cheap.
What was the name of it?
It was called Q Sushi. It's in Chicago. It's like, okay, I don't remember exactly where it is.
Like the letter Q?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. And you also mentioned at the beginning that you used to have a food business?
Yeah. I used to own a catering business and started that, and things were going really well. And turns out people who are not in offices and, people not going into hospitals don't need to be catered to anymore. So I think the upside of the business kind of lost some steam there. So I was able to successfully exit there and transition full-time into the sports betting biz.
Nice. So was that kind of a COVID thing?
When the transition happened? Yeah, we tried it, and it just like, especially not, like, it wasn't just like an on-off switch of like, okay, COVID's done, everyone come back. It's hybrid, and I mean, we're still there in a lot of places. So again, like if people aren't in offices, which is a primary source of business, or if they're not in hospitals or big congregating areas, like it loses some of the luster, I think.
Since you started that catering business, is cooking something that you do a lot of or get into? Is that part of the reason you started that business?
Yeah, no, it's I do cook a lot. I can't say that I'm a fantastic chef. We hired out other chefs, but I love food, and I cook plenty. So it was more about, I don't know, something that I thought could make great money. And for a while I was right. So that's,
Right.
that's what matters.
Well, my understanding is that like catering businesses make a lot more money than restaurants
Yeah,
because of
right. You have
like
a lot
food
less
wasting,
overhead.
right? Yeah, a lot less
Yep.
overhead, less food waste. You kind of know exactly who you're cooking for. Like you have set numbers, right?
Yep. Yeah. We had multiple permanent locations in different, different places, as well as like catering for big offices. You're just dropping off food for a couple hundred people and, they pay up front. So you don't have to worry about anything else.
Excellent. I am looking forward to my Chicago road trip this spring as I continue this journey of insane league games for my kids' soccer, youth soccer career. But I'm actually looking forward to coming back to Chicago. Have you been to SKY?
I don't think I have. What is that?
It's something Asian fusion. It was delicious. We went there last time. I think it was after the pandemic.
Okay.
I want to say like 2021. If I knew my Chicago neighborhoods, I could probably tell you. I don't. But it goes by its initials, SKY, and it was delicious.
It's in Pilsen. Okay.
Yeah, Pilsen. I was actually going to say Pilsen, but I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of a Chicago native.
Yeah, no, I don't spend as very much time down there, so I gotta there's a bunch of amazing food though in Pilsen, especially Hispanic food. But this is interesting. It looks really good. So, although I have to give it a try.
There are few places that the four of us all agree on, and we all just loved it. So I'm looking forward to getting back there, and I mean that'll be probably with Chicago. There's just so many places, right? That you want to try something new, and it's kind of rare that you want to kind of go back to somewhere like that. I mean, we tried a bunch of different places, and this was one that we're like, hey, we'd like to come back, and we also do like Choco by Rick Bayless a lot. We like that as the SKY is more of like sit down, nice meal, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas Choco is just like a spot that I like to go to just because it's good and not too expensive, right?
Yeah, so it's a good blend. It's like you don't want to break the bank for every meal. There's plenty of good food out there that doesn't require you to spend insane amounts of money.
Absolutely, Connor. If you could have dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
It's funny because it kind of came up earlier in our conversation, but right now, I'd love to have dinner with like Mike McDaniel from the Miami Dolphins. Seems like an unintentionally hilarious person. I don't think he tries to be funny, but I think all of his interviews just crack me up, just the way he responds to things and the way he responds to reporters. And on top of that, I would love to just sit down, have dinner, and pick his brain for hours on schemes and ideas and where things come from, and basically just talk about football with one of the most innovative minds. Have a couple of drinks with him. I think that would just be an awesome time.
That's awesome. And when you win your 22-1 Mike McDaniel Coach of the Year bet, you're gonna pick up the bill, right?
Of course, yeah. I'll tweet at him. I don't even know if he has a Twitter, but I'll find a way to try and show him that I owe him a dinner and see if I can make something happen.
Awesome. Is there something about McDaniel? I mean, there's a lot of NFL coaches I think it'd be fascinating to have dinner with. Is it more just his personality that kind of makes that extra appealing?
Yeah, I think it's more of I think obviously Bill Belichick is someone who's super smart, but I don't think that he would be all that exciting to have dinner with. I think there's multiple layers here, because if I want to have dinner with someone, I don't want to just talk about football or the entire time, and I feel like there needs to be some other conversing as well, outside of just and being interesting. Bill is just very, very stern, monotone, and Mike McDaniel is to a sense too, but I think that he's a little bit more interesting in a couple other ways.
For sure. Connor Allen, thank you so much for joining me on the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find all your work.
Yeah, Ed, I appreciate you having me on. It's a great time. You guys can find all my work at 4for4.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Connor Allen NFL.
Awesome. And you guys have some services over at 4for4 for people who are looking for some bets?
Yeah, we release, I personally release 10 to 15 player props each week in our Discord. It's been going super well so far. I think I'm up like 12, 13 units at this point through the season. So it's a pretty solid outing. And then we also release sides, totals. I provide in-depth explanations for every single pick. So it's not just a pick, providing a little bit more than that. So, appreciate anyone who checks it out, and feel free to DM me if you have any questions on how we release things or any of our process.
I think you did a great job kind of explaining like your process behind Dalton Kincaid. I presume that's what everyone gets with your service as well, right?
Yep. Yeah. I released that about 10 minutes prior to the show. There's like literally 6 props on the board here. So required me doing some serious deep diving. But it was a play that I was already leaning towards anyways, and the analysis was able to flesh it out on top of that.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate that. With the 4for4 service, it's not just you, right? I mean, there's other people that are helping you with the betting there, right?
Yeah. So Sharp Clark, I believe you had him on your show earlier at some point in this offseason. Yeah, he does a fantastic job of sides and totals. He, I think, does a really good job of thinking differently and like approaching the sides and totals market in just a very unique way. And I think that that's pretty important in winning long term in the sides and totals market. So we love having him on board and his analysis and everything. And then on top of that, we have Ryan Noonan, who focuses on tackle props. So he has his own projections for tackles and assists, for sacks, for everything, and has been absolutely crushing it. He's like over 60% for the last 2 years combined. And those are on, widely available plays and everything. And it sounds crazy, but I mean, these niche markets, like even, player props are kind of niche, but narrowing that down to even tackle props here, again, you're probably not gonna be able to bet thousands on it, but that's not most people's budget anyway. So, I think we're looking at a spot where you can win a little bit more, but not as much capital, I guess, in each play. So it's a good time though. And I think we have a great community in the Discord of really sharp subscribers who are always, bouncing ideas off of each other as well.
Awesome. Connor, thank you again.
My name is Ed Fang, and I'm proud to be your host for the Football Analytics Show. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation with Connor Allen as much as I enjoyed having it. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter. This includes 5 Nugget Saturday, my curated list of sports betting tips, analytics, and humor. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. Once again, my name is Ed Fang. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week.